Well, thank you very much, Brian. Hello, everyone. And after that introduction, I'm actually looking forward to hearing a bit this presentation myself. So, as Brian explained, my name is Matthew Griffin. I'm the founder and CEO of the 311 Institute and the World Futures Forum. I'm a futurist and I'm a strategic advisor. My purview is the next 50 years. But one of the most important things that we have to consider when we're actually looking at the future is there needs to be a future that we can actually look at in the first place. And this is where sustainability obviously comes in. Now, I work with a whole variety of different investors around the world. Typically, we have about $6 trillion under management, and the vast majority of those investors are prioritizing ESG investments. So in this particular presentation, I'm going to be going through a whole raft of sustainability issues, challenges, and I'm going to be presenting you with solutions that you can take home. So, as Brian mentioned, the ME team are going to be sending you through a variety of different codexes. So while we're going to be going at a relatively fast pace throughout this entire presentation, I've recently written a 2021 Trends Codex. There are about 100 different trends in there. They're all mega trends. You can see what the trends are. You can see what their impact is on global society, business and culture. You can see what the solutions are. And more importantly, perhaps you can see what United Nations Sustainability Development Goals those megatrends directly relate to or impact, depending on your point of view. So, the first question we should really be asking ourselves is, do we want to build a sustainable society or a regenerative one? There is a difference. Now, from a business leader's perspective, there are really three things that you should have when you're putting your sustainability plan together. So we'll sort of wrap ESG and everything else under just that general topic of sustainability. So firstly, you need to be able to measure your own inputs and outputs as a business, and then you need to put in procedures and policies in place that help you create a sustainable business. So this is, for example, your operations. So energy consumption, where you base your offices, all sorts of different things. So look at your business first. Secondly, when you're having a look at sustainability, then start developing a sustainable supply chain. So that's where you work with your partners in your supply chain to try to minimize the impact to the world, not just the environment. That's a bit of a conversation we'll have in a moment. And then thirdly, look at your customers. So this is really sort of stage three. The reason why I say look at the sustainability of your customers is if you've gone to all this effort to create a sustainable business, to produce a sustainable product that you then ship to a customer who just throws it in the bin or sends it straight to landfill, for example, it's a whole bunch of wasted effort. So you've got to bring your customers into the sustainability conversation, whether they kind of like it or not, and this is where you influence behaviors. Now, why does sustainability matter? So, we all think we know, but frankly, it's because people matter. And to put this into corporate speak, the Earth matters, but more than that, the Earth is mission critical. Without the Earth, we don't have a society, and it's suggested that at the moment, the way that society is going, humanity will last about another 10,000 years. If we can correct some of our sustainability issues, we might actually last a couple of million years. So there's a sort of good point there. Every year, human society uses over 100 billion tons of planetary resources. 8.6% of that is recycled. That's unsustainable. And that leads to problems. So by the year 2030, it's estimated that we will need 35% more food. We will need 40% more water. We will need 50% more energy, bearing in mind that this is in just not even 9 years' time. However, when we have a look at sustainability, the challenges that we have is we are going to need more and more resources to feed our ever-growing needs in society against the backdrop of biodiversity collapse. So this is in the codex that you'll see. So we've seen a 20% decrease in global biodiversity since 1900. Extreme weather events, we've seen a 600% increase since the year 2000. 1.23 million people have been killed by extreme weather. 4.2 billion people have been displaced and affected by extreme weather, and it's caused just under $3 trillion worth of damage globally. So these are the multi-billion-dollar extreme events that we're seeing today all around the world, wildfires, you name it. Ocean acidification generally doesn't sort of get mentioned in a lot of sort of presentations, but there's been a 30% increase in ocean acidification, which affects over 75% of marine life. That affects fisheries. Do you like that salmon that you're eating? You like that tuna that you're eating? You've got to care about ocean acidity. When we have a look at resource scarcity, cobalt, fish, land, lithium, and wood basically are all destined to run out within 100 years. And that's before we discuss coal, liquid natural gas, oil, and all these other things. And in fact, shortages of wood at the moment basically are pushing up the price of building a house in America by $24,000, hitting your pocket aside from anything else. Sea level rise. By 2030, we will see 570 global cities affected. We will see 1 billion people affected. And then, of course, water stress. So water stress, water scarcity. By 2030, over 129 countries on Earth, which is pretty much all of them, will be exhibiting water stress. And if you have water stress, the definition of this is you can't grow crops, which then leads us into a problem when we start talking about feeding the world. Now, those are the problems. You know most of those problems. So let's now start talking about what you can do as a business, what you can do as individuals, what you can do even as public servants if you're in government to solve these problems. Now, firstly, you've got to think local. The impact that you have at a local level, even at an individual level, has a global impact. If you as an individual recycle more, it actually has a global impact. If you as a business recycle more, if you cut down your energy and resource consumption, it has a global impact. So everything matters. Now, I'm going to go through the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, basically because a lot of people, when we're talking about the UN SDGs, we talk about the problems. We don't necessarily talk or present too many of the solutions. And that's what I'm gathering that you're interested in. So the first one that I'm going to go through is developing a sustainable society. These are all interconnected. You'll see this throughout this presentation. So when we look at no poverty, there are a number of things that you can do as a business. You will have people within your business who are below the poverty line. You will also have people within your country who are below the poverty line. So you can take this at a government level, an institutional level, an organization level, or an individual level. And that applies to everything that I'm going to be saying in this presentation. Now, in order to solve poverty, firstly, we can look at cooperative business models. We can look at employee ownership. So, for example, in the United Kingdom, we have John Lewis, which is both a co-op and actually a partnership model, but also financial inclusion. Now, when we look at financial inclusion, here's some of my futurists coming out. We have central bank digital currencies that are actually being trialed in China. We have the European ECB, France, the UK, and the US, who are all starting to tentatively roll out CBDCs. CBDCs, which are a type of cryptocurrency, where the cryptocurrency replaces the country's own fiat currencies, is a very, very good way to bring 2 billion people out of poverty and increase financial inclusion. When we have a look at quality education, we had digital connectivity because that's increasingly important, and you'll see why for a variety of reasons. We have digital education and skills. You will have people within your business who don't really understand what digital is. They might not have the skills basically to actually use some of your platforms. So if you want digital inclusion, you've got to train some of your staff on education and skills. Then, of course, we have online education, these sort of video on demand platforms and all that kind of stuff. And then we have teacher hiring and retention, which can apply basically to corporate training as well. Now, when we start looking at trying to solve this problem at a global and at a micro level, firstly, we have the rollout of over 12,000 low Earth orbit satellites, courtesy of companies like OneWeb, Starlink, etc., etc., etc. These satellites are now in orbit. They are starting to connect every single person on the planet to 200 megasecond internet. And this brings in 4 billion new users. Now, on the one hand, this means that we have a lot more people joining the digital era, the digital economy. So from your own organization's perspective, this doubles your global addressable market opportunity if you are already a digitized organization. However, once we have actually laid the groundwork, the digital connectivity, we still, to a degree, have a hiring problem, particularly when we look at teachers around the world. And so now we have digital humans actually filling this gap. So this is Will. This is just a little video. So Will is a digital human with a neural network brain who has actually been teaching over 250,000 children in New Zealand and Australia about renewable energy. So we actually have new solutions to challenges that are already here, as well as existing hiring and training challenges. Now, when we start having a look at gender equality, so this is where your company should really be thinking about childcare programs, equal opportunities in pay, flexible working options. That's especially important, basically, for working mothers and working women. And leveling the law. Now, when we talk about leveling the law, that's at a national level, but you can also bring that down to an organizational level as well. You can translate the word law into policies. So if you want to enable gender equality, these are some of the things that you can actually do, and they're relatively straightforward for you to enact. When we actually have a look at decent work and economic growth, UNSDG 8, we have labor rights and standards. Again, within your own organizations, this is a policy rulebook. We can level up education and training. There will be people within your own organization that are at different levels, basically, of skills and expertise. So that's down to your training regimen and programs. And then we have R&D and investment, basically, for global growth. Now, when we have a look at the R&D investment piece, at the moment, basically, most organizations around the world are spending about $1.73 trillion a year on R&D and innovation, with most of that actually coming out of China and the US, and most of that coming from the Fortune 1000, as you'd expect. And a lot of that innovation is actually technology, which is obviously going to have an impact on the sustainability solutions that you can roll out. Now, when we start talking about leveling up the world, basically from a equal opportunities and a decent work perspective, we know this. We can work from anywhere. You could find the best programmer based in the Antarctic, and provided you have the right employee systems in place, so collaboration and working systems in place, they can collaborate with your teams and they can build software. So increasingly we have this sort of opportunity to bring people into the global workforce, that we could never ever have imagined, but we need that digital connectivity that we saw in quality education. As a weird example of how some people around the world are now starting to earn their income from a futurist perspective, we can scan your face, we can put it onto a deep fake, like Nikolai here, and Nikolai can then rent his face out to start advertising products, marketing products. He can be the face of your global training campaign. So this is where we start meeting deep fakes, and this is where we get into some of the weirdness of future jobs. Renting your face out isn't a future job because it's already here, courtesy of companies like Hour One. Now, when we actually have a look at reduced inequalities, so eliminate discriminatory practices within your business at every level. So vertical and horizontal. Equal opportunity policies. You can sort of see that a lot of these sustainability challenges can be met with policy development, but also by having the right culture by having the right organizational culture, and then promote diversity and inclusion. So we already see a lot of this. We see the D&I basically on boards already increasing. From a sustainable health perspective, because you want your people to be healthy in a sustainable way, zero hunger. So we have agriculture too, and I'll come on to that in a little while. We have land reform and regeneration, because so far over 50% of all the land on the planet is now degraded. That affects our ability to feed our growing population. And then reduce poverty, which switches us back to UNSDG 1. Now, when we talk about agriculture too, agriculture contributes about 30% of all greenhouse gases. So the food that you guys buy to put into your canteen either comes from South America, different parts of Europe, the UK, North America, Russia if it's wheat, etc., China if it's pork, for example. We have new ways of farming coming through that mean that you can actually grow everything that you actually have in your canteen. You can produce, and I'll come on to that later, everything that you produce in your canteen. So here's a vertical farm. This is fully autonomous. You can think urban farming. You can put one of these in your canteen.
What if we could grow better produce for everyone? Because when it comes to locally grown food, quality shouldn't be a luxury, and quantity shouldn't be a compromise. At Ironox, we're using robotics and intelligence to grow better food for less, in a way that uses less. Less of what we can't get back, or can't afford to waste. Ironox grows a perfect head, year-round. We're increasing access to premium produce for everyone.
So agriculture and food production is one of the most polluting and damaging industries on the planet. We have a way basically to eliminate the animal. We can put the farms basically into vertical farms. That particular farm that you saw there uses 99% less water. It uses 100% less herbicides, pesticides, and chemicals. And from an energy perspective, it uses renewable energy. So that technology right there eliminates over 20 to 30% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Now, when we have a look at active lifestyle or good health and well-being, this applies to both physical health and mental health, especially important as we start coming out of the pandemic. We have active lifestyles and healthy living. So from a company perspective, are you encouraging your employees to have healthy, active lifestyles? Affordable healthcare services, which is particularly crucial in the US, basically, which now has one of the most expensive healthcare systems basically on the planet, and then healthy environments. So when we talk about healthy environments, basically these are things like well-designed offices, co-working spaces, and so on and so forth, as well as pollution-free environments, which brings us to climate change, which is SDG 13, and we'll come on to that soon. So when we start having a look at health and wellness, for example, this is where you can use the quantified self. So wearables, basically to track and monitor people's activity. You can link those to your health insurance premiums and local gyms. We also have the technologies today that allow us to take a smartphone or even this video feed, and artificial intelligence embedded into this video feed or the camera, basically that I'm talking to, can tell my blood pressure, my heart rate. It can tell whether or not I have PTSD, dementia, whether I have pancreatic cancer because your skin turns a slightly different color, your eyes turn a slightly different color. It can tell whether I have skin cancer. So there's a huge amount of value that we can unlock as we start using new technologies to decentralize and democratize access to healthcare services. We can even do remote surgery.
We had a young woman with an acute heart attack. The total transfer time to get her to our hospital was 3 hours. There's a feeling of helplessness as a physician that you know what the treatment is to limit their chance of death, but you can't get to them.
Our hypothesis is that if we implement remote robotics in its full capacity, we will change the lives for hundreds of thousands of patients in the US and millions around the world.
Using technologies like 5G networks and robotic systems to provide cardiac care at a distance and be able to do telestenting has the potential to change the landscape of medicine. 5G technology really opens up the possibility to do these over longer distances with minimal delays in signal and transmitting greater amounts of data.
Being able to reach a patient hundreds of miles away to deliver the care they need when they need it is one of the most disruptive things happening in the medical industry.
So every year, 43 million people die because they don't have access to surgeons or surgeries. Over 143 million people suffer because they don't have access to the same either. So by using robotics, teleoperations, and 5G networks, we can actually extend the benefits of advanced primary healthcare services to pretty much everyone on the planet. Your surgeon can be based here with me. The patient can be based thousands of miles away, and we can actually operate on them and do a variety of other things as well. So healthcare is changing substantially. Now, when we have a look at clean water and sanitation, I already mentioned 129 countries are headed for complete water stress. 85% of California, for example, is now in extreme drought, where the dams, Hoover Dam, for example, is running so low that California faces an energy crisis, let alone anything else. Now, on the one hand, we can look at sustainable water extraction technologies. We can look at water regeneration programs. So this is actually where we are making local wetlands, rivers, etc., healthier places. And we can look at water recycling. So in California, they're spending $750 million to try and recycle at least 75% of all the water they use to avoid, frankly, catastrophic drought. And remember this, if there is no water, there is no civilization. Now, futurist hat on again. This is a 3D printed heat exchanger courtesy of General Electric. It was built and designed for the US military. If you put one of these onto the roof of your buildings, this alone can generate over 500 liters of pure, fresh water a day. You don't need any pipes. It draws the water out of the atmosphere. It's a direct capture device. And there are lots more like these coming. So you don't need pipes and plumbing, basically, to get water from your water treatment plant, basically to the taps in your office building, if you don't want to. Now, when we have a look at sustainable environment, decentralized energy generation, when we talk about UN SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, and renewable energy solutions. Now, at the moment, when we have a look at renewable energy, bearing in mind that energy production accounts for about 80% of all greenhouse gases in that sort of industry, transportation, agriculture sector, etc. Firstly, renewable energy is now the cheapest form of energy in over 68 countries. We are rapidly approaching the point where the cost of generating electricity using renewable energy technologies like wind, solar, etc. is actually dropping to zero. We have over 1 trillion watts of renewable energy installed. It's estimated we need to spend about another $4 trillion to start getting that to 6 trillion watts, which is pretty much the world then done and off of fossil fuels. And as for the myth, basically, that solar can only work when it's sunshine, courtesy of nanophotonic materials and materials like black silicon, we have 48% energy efficient solar panels already in the labs. And we can generate moonlight, and we have solar panels that are 132% energy efficient coming out of the labs. So we will be able to generate electricity using solar panels, concentrators, and everything else in all conditions, which then reduces our need on grid scale storage. UN SDG 13, you are familiar with this. 60% of organizations prioritize United Nations SDG 13 climate change because it actually has an impact on a huge variety of other things, extreme weather and so on and so forth. So carbon capture and storage, come on to that in a little bit. Circular economy, I'll come on to that in a little bit. Decarbonization and net zero. So do you have a decarbonization and net zero policy? If you don't, get one. There's a good reason if you are a little bit resistive to that. And then an industry electrification. So electrify your industry. Now, when we start having a look at UN SDG 13, increasingly, particularly from a European perspective, if you are a polluter, particularly a carbon polluter, you are going to pay. So at the moment, it costs about $50 to pollute using carbon dioxide. It costs about $120 to bury that carbon dioxide. So as a polluter, you keep polluting because it's cheaper. The European Union is now starting to implement price hikes. So you are going to see the cost of polluting being more expensive than the cost of burying carbon. And we are reaching that tipping point now. So if you are a polluting organization or in a polluting industry, you are going to end up being hit by a whole variety of price increases on the carbon market. Now, we already have the technology to decarbonize and eliminate 70% of all greenhouse gas emissions globally. We can do this by making a whole variety of different carbon neutral technologies available to industry. So agriculture, we have new food production techniques. So vertical farms, and we have lab meat coming through. That eliminates about 20% of all GHGs. We have zero energy air conditioning. If you are paying money for your air conditioning, you don't need to, because courtesy of Stanford University, we've got aircon that uses no energy, beams heat directly into space. We have concrete, green concrete, that eliminates 10% of all GHGs. We have energy, that eliminates the lion's share of GHGs. We have industrial processes, we can actually create green steel courtesy of hydrogen and solar ovens, so we no longer need to actually use huge amounts of energy, basically in aluminium, steel and concrete production. And then transport, we are electrifying transport, electric cars, electric vans, electric trains, electric semi-trucks, electric aircraft, etc., etc., etc. So we already have the technology to decarbonize 70%. Now, when we start having a look at UN SDG 14, life below water, firstly, you've got to take action on climate action, which is UN SDG 13, decarbonisation and net zero, sustainable fisheries. Now, when we have a look at decarbonisation and net zero, every second we have the equivalent of 5 atomic bombs worth of heat going into the oceans. That's storing up a huge problem for us in the future. It's already starting to accelerate sea level change, etc., 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 which fuels bigger, more powerful hurricanes. We're talking about category 6 hurricanes now actually being a ranking now, particularly in Japan. And then sustainable fisheries. So today, for example, we go and fish. Most fish stocks are actually under threat. However, courtesy of organizations like Finless Foods, we can take a stem cell or just an ordinary cell from a fish like a tuna, a salmon, a swordfish, a cod, a haddock, whatever it happens to be. We can put that stem cell into a bioreactor and we can grow what you see here. This is high-grade tuna meat. And it's not plant-based, it's not synthetic, it's not artificial. We have just replicated how the fish itself grows its own flesh in a bioreactor. That alone weans us off the need to go fishing, unless, of course, you're a fan of release and catch. When we have a look at life on land, we have agriculture 2.0, so that's, as I've sort of mentioned, new ways to produce food. We've got greening initiatives and urban planning initiatives. We also have rewilding. So when we have a look at rewilding, that's a particularly interesting area. I actually encourage you to go and have a look at some of the initiatives that Yellowstone have been running. They reduced their bison. They introduced wolves, for example. They reduced the bison herds from 18,000 to 5,000, and biodiversity increased by 600%. So again, this is in the Trends Codex that you have. However, when we start talking about greening, you can add greenery to buildings. You can add greenery to cities like Singapore have, for example. So we can bring nature into cities, but it does require us to plan our buildings and our cities in a sensible, environmentally friendly way. And then we're sort of pretty much getting there now. When we have a look at sustainable living, we have industry, innovation and infrastructure. We have creative machines. Creative machines can accelerate your rate of innovation by anywhere by 1,000 to 1 billion fold. It's a whole conversation in itself, but they can do something from a sustainability perspective, and I'll tell you that in a moment. Public wealth programs, if you are a government or an organization and you own a lot of building and infrastructure assets, look at public wealth initiatives, because increasingly we can use those assets to fund upgrades and future infrastructure investments. When we look at creative machines are artificial intelligences that are able to innovate, design, and generate new products. We do that using artificial intelligence, compute, simulation engines, so this is virtual worlds, and then we can 3D print those creations off. At the moment, these creative machines are iterative. They'll get to disruptive in about the next 5 to 10 years. But the real benefit of an artificial intelligence that is able to design your next product is, for example, in Airbus's case, it can chop 30% off of the weight of individual components. That means you have to buy less material. If you 3D print it, you actually waste no material. So from a sustainability perspective, things like additive manufacturing, which is 3D printing, can help you get to zero waste, but can also help you reduce the amount of materials that you're using to make your products in the first place by a significant margin. And they're being used to make sneakers and drugs. They're being used to make lunar rovers that are 30% lighter, etc., basically for NASA. So I encourage you to check this trend out. When we have a look at things like sustainable communities, this is where we get into smart buildings and infrastructure, safe communities, and sustainable urban planning. So if you have an office and it is a smart office and it turns the lights off basically when no one is around, it's intelligent in that way, for example, that plays into your sustainability play. And there's lots more we can talk about there as well. And here's an example.
Born thousands of years ago, they connected us and pushed humanity forward. But they also divided us from nature, from each other, from ourselves. They forgot about people. They forgot about the planet. And we forgot what's important. It's time to remember. It's time for a revolution. It's time to redefine our relationship with nature, to reimagine what a city is without cars and roads, without smog or noise. It's time to rethink communities so that we can connect and create the way we were meant to. It's time. It's time to draw the line. NEOM.
So, if you are interested in smart cities, sustainable buildings, sustainable living, I encourage you to go and have a look at NEOM. So NEOM is a $500 billion with a T dollar new smart city that is being built in Saudi Arabia. There are lots of other sort of examples, but that's actually a really good one. Or you can just have a conversation with me. When we have a look at responsible consumption, this is where we look at advanced manufacturing. So 3D printing products allows you to get to zero net waste, as well as reduce the amount of materials and resources that you need to make those products in the first place. Circular economy, I have a little bit of something for you there. Education programs, because you need to educate people that they need to consume responsibly. And then material and product innovation. So circular economy and material and product innovation are absolutely tied at the hip. And here are a couple of examples. So this is a rocket engine that was designed by artificial intelligence. And unlike anything that any human has ever created, this is from Hyperganic. This is one piece. You use it, when you're done with it, you recycle it. There's no messing around with breaking down components and all that sort of stuff. When we have a look at companies like Adidas are a very good example basically of an organization that's trying to move the bar on sustainability. They've partnered with Parley. They are using ocean plastic, for example, that they are then recycling to create circular economy training shoes. Now, the interesting thing basically that you have to bear in mind is if you are looking to create a product that plays into the circular economy, you've got to be able to deconstruct it easily, which means you need to look at material innovations such as new adhesives, etc., new plastics, new materials, all that kind of stuff. And for those of you basically that manufacture more complex products, what about a car? So this is BMW's iCircular concept. They want to produce it by 2040. But again, it uses special adhesives, special materials, so it can all be broken down and reused. It is 100% not recyclable, 100% reusable. There is a difference. So BMW is also another very good example of an organization that's doing some really interesting things on sustainability, particularly when we have a look at things like digital twins for their factories, which again is another story. And then this is the last one, United Nations SDG 16. You might not think that this is important or particularly important, but over the next 10 to 20 years, particularly the next 10 years, this is vital. So when we have a look at strong institutions, all of the world's leading institutions, basically from the World Health Organization to the IEC to the ISO, are all, even to the United Nations to a degree, are all being undermined. As we see a future bipolar and multipolar world coming through where we have the US and we have China who are trying to interplay with one another, and we have Europe in the middle, we are starting to see technology standards splitting. So in your codex, look at standards shadow wars and you'll see what I'm talking about. So we have to have strong institutions. We have to be able to defend and protect democracies. So this is where we get into the scourge that is misinformation, disinformation, trolling and all that kind of stuff. And we have to have strong standards boards, because if we do not have strong standards boards, then the technology purchases like 5G, 6G, artificial intelligence, everything that your businesses are going to rely on now and into the future is going to be much, much harder to buy, upgrade, integrate, and everything else. This is much more important than you think. Do you have a strategy for a UN SDG 16? And then that's it from me. So thank you very much. I've obviously not traveled today, as you can see, so I've cut down on my own carbon footprint, and I look forward to taking your questions.